Am I wrong for not wanting to get my girlfriend an expensive engagement ring? I, 26 male, have been with my girlfriend, 26 female, for 4 years, and we've recently been talking more and more about marriage. Although my girlfriend grew up relatively well off, for the time I've known her, she's been pretty low maintenance. She's never cared about designer brands, rarely buys new clothes, and the jewelry she owns was gifted to her. I have a decent job and make up to $80,000 a year, and I've been saving for a while, but growing up, my family didn't have a lot of money. My girlfriend and I have always seemed to be on the same page when it comes to saving money. I assumed she would be fine with a more affordable ring. When I started looking into rings, I discovered moissanite rings, which look similar to diamond rings but are much more affordable. I see where this is going. I was looking at rings in the $1,500 to $1,800 range. This girl wants a real diamond. When I mentioned this to her, she insisted she wanted a real diamond ring and sent me links to a bunch of diamond rings that she liked. The prices range from $6,500 to $10,000. I told her I wasn't willing to spend that much. She seemed genuinely mad and said it wasn't that expensive. We got into a pretty big argument over it. I told her that it was ridiculous to ask me to spend that much and that I thought she was more reasonable than that. She said I was being cheap and that I could afford it and that I was basically saying she wasn't worth it. I told her no one is worth a $10,000 ring. I get you, but you can't. Eventually, my girlfriend said she didn't care and that I should get whatever ring I want, but she's clearly still mad, and I know this is going to be an ongoing argument. I'm a bit frustrated because this seems out of left field. I've always known marriage is super important to her, but I didn't realize she'd insist on a diamond ring. So I talked to my older sister about it, who, despite agreeing diamond rings were stupidly priced, sided with my girlfriend and said if I could afford it, she didn't see the big deal. She added that my girlfriend has done so much for me and I was being an asshole about this. What my sister means by my girlfriend doing so much for me is that she was really supportive when I was in a serious car accident 4 years ago. I broke multiple bones and required a few surgeries. Although where I live, most healthcare is covered, I was unable to work for a while and had expenses I wasn't able to pay. I had been dating my girlfriend for only 6 months at the time and she was really there for me. I couldn't pay my rent, so she let me move in with her for free and help pay for a few expenses and for physical therapy I needed. She also helped me get a job with her uncle, who was the VP of an insurance company. Obviously, I've thanked her for all she did for me, but it's not something we talk about much. I don't think I'm obligated to buy an expensive ring because she helped me out a few years ago. But if my own sister said this, I'm guessing my girlfriend must feel this way as well. So, am I the asshole here? I agree with you in a sense where rings should not be, rings are a scam, it's a waste of money, but you love her and this is something that she wants. Oh, I'm conflicted. I don't know. I see both sides, but What makes you happy? I don't know. Don't listen to me. I just tell the stories.
Story time about how my husband and my dad got into a fist fight on our wedding day. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. My dad is in the military, therefore he is super strict. He's never liked any of my boyfriends and especially my fiance. My fiance is a musician, so he sometimes doesn't have a lot of income. So my dad thinks that he's absolutely lazy. I have a really good job and I always end up making a lot more than my fiance. This means that I have to make up for his lack of money. So usually I end up paying for most of the bills and my fiance ends up paying for about a third of our rent. And we do live in a nice fancy apartment. I mean, we've got a pool, a sauna, there's a bunch of amenities, and most of the time my fiance only gives me about $500 towards rent. My dad knows all of these issues, and trust me, it is an issue for me because I want him to be able to provide for me and our babies whenever I get pregnant, but it really irks my dad. But of course, it really bothers my dad. Every time my fiance and I go over to my parents for dinner, my dad is always making comments about how he doesn't earn enough money, and he asks him, like, how are you going to provide for your family? And that's when my fiance and him usually get into a fight. Our wedding day was quickly approaching, so I wanted to keep a distance between my fiance and my dad. Everything was good up until the reception. My now husband and I were saying hello to friends. Out of nowhere, my dad tackles my husband down. That's when all hell breaks loose. Part 2 is up. 2 of how my husband and my dad got into a fist fight on our wedding day. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. So my dad body slams my new husband onto the ground. Then, of course, all of my husband's friends come attack my dad and try to pull him off of my husband. By the way, my dad is super strong. Like I said in part 1, he's in the army, so he's built and super strong. My dad and my husband were pummeling each other. They were even kicking each other on our wedding day. Yeah, I'm in my wedding dress crying while everyone else is going crazy. Luckily, I invited a friend and her boyfriend is a cop. So he went up to my dad, who was clearly the stronger one in the fight, and was able to restrain him. When they were finally separated, my dad started yelling at my husband, calling him a liar and a cheater. And when I heard my dad say that, my stomach dropped. I knew that my dad had my back and that he probably found out something about my husband. My dad grabs my hand and pulls my mom into a separate room. Then he shows me pictures of my husband with another woman in a parking lot. That's when my dad explained to me that he didn't trust my fiance, so he decided to hire a private investigator to follow him around. Remember in part 1 I said that I was paying for almost everything in our relationship? My dad really hated this, and he was convinced that instead of going to work, my fiance was spending time with another woman. And guess what? He was right. Of course, my dad felt really bad about causing a whole scene, but that's when he told me that we had to annul the marriage. I honestly didn't know what to do at the time, so I told my dad that I needed to speak to my husband. My friend's boyfriend, the cop, was there the whole time. He took my dad out of the room and then brought in my husband. Of course, my mom stayed in the room with me to have some backup, and we grilled my husband husband for about 20 minutes. First, he denied everything, but when I showed him the picture that my dad showed me, he said it was just a friend. Of course, my mom and I weren't buying it. That's when he finally confessed that it was his old girlfriend and that they were just saying goodbye for one last time. That's when he showed me all the text messages between him and his ex, and everything was pretty innocent. I asked him why he didn't tell me that he was going to go see his ex, and he told me that he just didn't want any drama with my dad. The cop brought my dad back in the room. I asked him to stay inside while my dad and my husband and I talked. Explained to my dad everything that happened, but he wasn't buying his story. My dad kept saying that we just needed to get a divorce. My husband was crying and begging me to forgive him. Then my dad started attacking him again. Once again, the cop had to restrain him and he put him in a chokehold. Part 3 of how my dad attacked my husband on our wedding day. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. My dad attacked my husband for a second time. Luckily, my friend's boyfriend, who was a cop, was there and was trying to manage the situation. Basically, we called off the entire reception. So $7,000 right down the drain. My husband and I were supposed to leave that night to Greece. I told my parents we should still go on the honeymoon and they agreed. But obviously my dad was really upset about it. But while we were in Greece, I caught my husband texting his ex again. This woman texted him saying that she missed him. Then he told her about the fight he got into with my dad. Then she said that my whole family is crazy and that he shouldn't have married into it. I confronted my husband and he told me that he needed her as a friend and that I just needed to deal with it. Then I told him that I was the one that paid for basically everything in our relationship, including most of our wedding and our honeymoon, and that he needed to be grateful to me and to my family. That's when he said that he would never speak to my family again. That's when I told him that the relationship wasn't going to work then. Now that we're back home, my parents really want me to get a divorce, but I'm not sure. Obviously, he has feelings for his ex and so does she. But I mean, I still love him. Why should I lose out? My husband is being super distant and barely talks to me. My dad is upset with me too because I haven't gotten a divorce. Should I just file for divorce? What should I do?
Am I wrong for rejecting someone's request to propose at my wedding? My husband and I got married last month and had a small and wonderful wedding. 2 weeks before the wedding, my best friend / maid of honor's boyfriend asked if it would be okay to propose during my reception. I first told him how thrilled I was that he was going to propose to my best friend and how excited she would be, but I really wasn't comfortable with him proposing during the wedding, at least as a public thing. He seemed totally shocked that I said no, which I can understand. He said that weddings are supposed to be about celebrating love and that as her best friend, I should want them to finally be engaged after 11 years together. I absolutely want that for them, but I just didn't understand why it needed to happen during the 5.5-hour window of my ceremony / cocktail hour / reception. I was very apologetic and offered to help however I could with the proposal on any other day, but he was very clearly not happy with me. I haven't heard from my maid of honor since the wedding, which is probably the longest we've ever gone without talking. I had tried several times to get in touch with her and let her know at one point that I had something of hers she had lost at the wedding. Never got a response. I texted the other day saying I was going to drop the lost item off at her house so she'd have it, and she finally responded. Apparently, during the after party at the hotel bar, my maid of honor's boyfriend got very drunk and told her that she would have been engaged that night if I hadn't ruined his plan. She said she isn't exactly mad at me, but she feels like her future engagement is ruined and that I denied her a chance at happiness. Whoa, what? Okay. Another mutual friend who knows what's going on says she doesn't. Another mutual friend who knows what's going on says she doesn't love that he planned to propose at the wedding, but thinks I was the asshole ultimately for saying no. Oh no, hell no! What the f? Get out of here! You're trying to propose at my wedding. It's fine if people say yes to it. More power to you. But if I say no, I might. What? The entitlement of some people. Get the hell out of here.
Story time about how I lied to my parents about having a boyfriend for 4 years. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My parents are super strict. Growing up, I could not have any guy friends. I wasn't even allowed to go over to my girlfriends' houses. At school, I was pretty popular, and the fact that my parents didn't let me have any boyfriends made the boys actually want me more, which is something my dad actually hated. Boys would call our house asking to talk to me, and my dad would grill me about it. So I finally decided to tell him that because he doesn't let me date any boys, that boys want me more. He laughed and said that that wasn't true, and that most likely I was just provoking these boys. Obviously, this really upset me. My dad was always really controlling. When I turned 16, I decided I wanted to get my own job. This way I could have some more freedom and just meet more people outside of school. I started working at a local restaurant and quickly made friends with everyone who was working there. They were all pretty much my age, especially one boy. Let's call him Rick. Rick and I hit it off right away. I had a huge crush on him instantly, and I could tell that he liked me too. But of course, my strict parents were always present in my mind, so I tried my best to stay away from Rick just so that I wouldn't develop any feelings, which I already had, who am I kidding? One day, Rick asked me if I wanted to take my break with him, and I said yes. He sat in his car for 30 minutes and just talked the entire time. I started falling in love with him. We talked so much, and he was so kind and so funny. The next few days at work, we were basically inseparable. Finally, at the end of the week, he asked me if I wanted to be his girlfriend, and I said yes. Without a moment of hesitation, I said yes, knowing that my parents would not want that at all. So here's when I told him that we needed to keep this a secret. He wanted to just speak to my parents, but I begged him not to. Thankfully, he understood. The only time we were able to spend together was at work. And we did this for a full year. When I turned 17, my parents insisted that I quit my job so that I could focus on school. I pretty much had to listen to them, so I did. This meant that Rick and I barely ever saw each other. Instead, I decided to sneak him into my house every single night. Part 2 is up. So I started sneaking my boyfriend into my room every single night. Disclaimers is not my story time, it was sending me on Instagram. My parents had literally no idea. I snuck my boyfriend Rick into my room every single night for a full year. The only time we ever got close to getting caught, the smoke alarm in our house went off, and as soon as we heard it, Rick jumped out through my window. My room was on the first floor, so this wasn't really an issue at all. I finally graduated from high school and started going to college. It became way easier to hide my relationship from my parents because I was living in a dorm. Rick would come visit me every single weekend, and my parents would come to visit me every now and then. Even when I was in college, you guys, my parents were still super strict. So one day I decided to ask my dad when I could have a boyfriend. He said when I was living under my own roof and paying my own bills. So the following year, that's exactly what I did. I was able to get a good job in my field, and so did Rick. So we put our money together and his parents helped us to get an apartment. But here's the thing, I didn't want my parents to know that I had a boyfriend this whole time. So instead I told them that Rick was my roommate who I met in college, and that I finally just decided that I wanted my own freedom. My dad was really proud of me for taking the initiative, which was crazy to me. He said he was proud of me. My mom, on the other hand, definitely did not want me moving in with some guy. So I invited Rick over to my parents' house. They met him for a little bit and they actually liked him. Fast forward 6 years, Rick and I are married, and my parents don't know that he was my boyfriend for 4 years. They think that we started dating after we moved in together. I kind of want to tell my parents, but I'm not sure. I think they would get really, really upset and possibly not speak to me. What do you think I should do?
This is why you should never trust your friend if they tell you that their pet don't bite. Charla Nash would go over to her friend's house, Sandra, every now and then to watch over her 200-pound chimpanzee. Charla knew straight off the bat that she did not like that chimpanzee because it always scared her. There was even a time where the chimpanzee jumped on Charla's back and ripped out a chunk of her hair. Charla started crying, but her friend Sandra thought it was funny. Sandra would not be laughing at anything that chimpanzee did much longer after this day. One day, Charla gets a call from Sandra saying her chimpanzee wouldn't go back in the cage and she needed some help. Charla drove over there to help her friend, and immediately after, Sandra would have to call the police. By the time the police arrived, Charla was laying on the ground with half of her face eaten off, no jaw, her nose hanging from her face by a piece of her skin, and with both of her hands ripped off. This is what Charla looked like before her attack. Her entire face was mutilated after the attack, but since the photos are super graphic, they'll be posted on my Instagram story. Part 2 will include the unsettling phone call Sandra made to the police and how she described her friend getting eaten and ripped apart. This is going to be part 2 of why you should never trust your friend if they tell you that their pet don't bite. Sandra never imagined that after she called her friend over to help her put her 200-pound chimpanzee back in his cage, since he wouldn't go in, she would have to make a phone call to the police and report how her chimpanzee ate her friend alive. This is the audio clip.
Please!
What's the problem with your friend? I need to know.
Get the police up! With a gun! With a gun! Hurry
Who
up!
wants a gun?
Please, hurry up! He's killing my girlfriend!
What is the problem?
He's killing my friend!
Who's killing your friend?
My chimpanzee!
Oh, your chimpanzee is killing your friend.
He ripped her apart! Hurry up! And she's dead. She's dead.
Why are you saying that she's dead?
She's dead. He ripped her apart.
Charla actually ended up surviving. She was rushed to the hospital where they said she looked like she had gone through a meat grinder. Charla is very lucky to still be with us today. The most recent update about Charla is in her interview with Oprah that I have linked in my Instagram story. So this is a story time of why I don't eat at other people's house no more. Me and my best friend, we were like 11 or 12 at the time, and we were having a sleepover at her house. We had hung out outside of school many times before. This would just be the first time I went over to her house. My mom drops me off and just lets me walk inside. When I went up to the door, my best friend answered, and she was like, "Hey, can you grab a shoe?" Immediately, I could tell that the house wasn't very clean, but I knew it wasn't her fault. It's not because she asked me to grab a shoe. I could see behind her and could tell that the house was just really messy. It really did look like an episode of Hoarders, but I grabbed a shoe and I helped her look for that fly. So it was me, my bestie, and her grandma looking for this big ass bug. We got a little tired, so we sat down to eat something, and her grandma made us a snack. I was a little scared to eat, not gonna lie, but I didn't want to make my best friend feel bad, so I went ahead and ate my food. Well, I was only able to eat some of it because we had left the basement door open, and we saw the bug fly down there. So we stopped eating, ran down to the basement, and we saw the bug fly behind this box. We moved this box, and I swear 100 families of spiders and their ancestors started spewing out, like for part 2. This is gonna be part 2 of why I don't eat at other people's house no more. Like I said, so many spiders started spewing out from behind this box. I genuinely thought that these spiders were going to eat all of us alive. It was not a fun situation. We did not run fast enough. These spiders started crawling all over us. I think I saw a lighter somewhere and considered setting myself on fire. I want you guys to imagine like my whole entire body covered up with spiders. That's what it felt like, but there was only like 5 or 6 on me. The grandma gets a blanket and starts whipping us with it. She's like trying to dust the spiders off. I see my best friend start stripping. I was a little about that, but I was like, fuck it. Anything to get these spiders off. Once we felt like we were good, we ran upstairs. My best friend started crying to me and apologizing and saying how much she hates her life and how she's so embarrassed. But I told her that all is good and this doesn't change the way that I see her at all. Have our little moment and then we sit down to eat again. And you know, I'm going in on my little SpaghettiOs. But all of a sudden, they start getting crunchy. I ignore it and I get down to the bottom of the bowl. When I look down, there is a half-eaten spider in the bottom of the bowl, like for part 3. This is gonna be part 3 of why I don't eat at other people's house anymore. So like I said, I was munching and grunching on some SpaghettiOs. It's getting crunchy and I'm like, what's this crunch? Where's all this crunch coming from? I was like, bruh, it's probably some expired SpaghettiOs, but let me finish this bowl so my friend don't feel bad. When I got to the end and there was only some soup left, I saw a half-eaten spider. The same spiders that we had seen downstairs. My body, it started vibrating. I was shaking. I seized out. I think I passed out. This was not a good situation. I did have a phobia of spiders. I told my best friend, listen, babes, I love you. You know I love you. But this cannot go on no longer. I'm gonna have to go home. I felt like such a terrible friend, but I did call my mom and she came to get me and she took me home. I told her what happened and she was upset with my friend's grandma. From then on, we only had sleepovers at my house. And ever since my family found out about her living situation, we would go over there sometimes to help them clean. We would bring food and games. I'm grown now, but me and this girl ended up falling out because of some drama. This is a story time about the time I dated the school shooter. This might be a long story, so please bear with me. Before you form any opinions on anyone in the story, please wait all the way until the end. Trust me, you're gonna want to listen to this story time. There was this boy who went to my school and he was really shy and he got bullied a lot. He got bullied a lot because he was a lot more feminine than other guys. And I'm just the type of person to give people the benefit of the doubt, so I went ahead and started talking to him more to see the type of person that he actually was. He didn't sit with anybody during lunch, so one day I went up to him and I sat down right next to him and I started talking to him. Immediately, I loved this boy. Everything about him. He was extremely sweet and considerate and understanding, and I knew that if other people took the time to get to know him, they would like him too. So we exchanged numbers and we started to FaceTime a lot. As we started to FaceTime more, I started to notice things that were a little off about him. Every single conversation that we had, he would always have to bring up about how much he hated this one boy in his tech class and how he would shoot up the school just to get rid of him, like for part 2. This is part 2 about how I dated the school shooter. So let me backtrack a little bit from part 1. We exchanged numbers, we started to make plans to hang out outside of school, and we just started talking more outside of school, and eventually we started dating. He never really talked about this guy in his tech class until we started dating. Keep that in mind. For some reason, that guy in his tech class really bothered him. Like I said, he started talking about how he would shoot up the school just to get rid of this guy. At first, I thought it was just a joke and he was just saying that, until he kept saying it. He started being so serious about it and he started planning it out and exactly what he would do when he did it. That started to scare me, and so I decided that I was gonna record one of these conversations, just in case. During that conversation, he said he planned to shoot up the school the next day. He said, in these exact words, fuck it, you know what? I'm just gonna do it tomorrow. Then he tells me to not come to school the next day. That's when I know that he was actually being serious. Immediately after, I started writing up an email to the school, like for part 3. This is gonna be part 3 of the time I dated the school shooter. So his exact plan was to use this new gun that his dad had just recently bought, and his exact goal was to get rid of that guy in his tech class, and his tech class was in the beginning of the school day. So after I wrote that email to the school about his plan and inserted the recording that I secretly took of him admitting to it, I realized that I had sent that email at around 12:05 a.m. Most of the time, the teachers don't ever email you back unless the school day has already started. That morning, for some reason, everything in my gut was telling me I sent the email too late. They're not gonna open it in time. They're not gonna see it in time. My mom just thought that I was sick that day, so I told her that I was gonna take a walk around the neighborhood. And I totally forgot to mention that he lived in my neighborhood. I told my mom I was going on a walk, but I was actually going to his house to tell his parents. By the time I got there, his mom told me that the dad is driving him to school. Told her his plan, let her listen to the recording. So she checked where the dad put the gun and it was not there. She called the dad to tell him to check his bag. The dad said he had already dropped him off at school and he was halfway home. His tech class was first period, like for part 4. This is gonna be part 4 of the time I dated the school shooter. So let me do a little recap. So like I said, I ran to his house that morning to try to tell his parents his plan about shooting up the school, and I showed them the recording for proof. I was only able to tell the mom his plan because the dad had already taken him to school. She checked where this new gun he was planning on using was supposed to be and it wasn't there. Then when she called the dad to tell him to check their son's bag, the dad said 1, the gun should still be there because he hadn't touched it since he put it away, and 2, he had already dropped him off at school and he was halfway home. I didn't even tell my mama where I was going. I hopped in the car with my boyfriend's mom and we zoomed. The dad had taken a U-turn and he was speeding towards the school too. At this point, first period was about to start in 5 minutes. It was us against time. We were passing cars, running red lights. We got to the school. The mom barely parked the car. The dad was already in there, I'm pretty sure. But as we were running inside, the dad was coming out with my boyfriend. This is what happened after, like for part 5. This is gonna be part 5 about the time I dated the school shooter. Like I said, my boyfriend's parents and I sped to the school and got there in time to stop him from carrying out his plan of shooting the school. I'm guessing the dad told him that there was like an emergency dentist appointment or something. Once they got in the car, the dad made my boyfriend open his bag, and there was the gun. Child, the way my heart. You hear that? That's how fast my heart was beating at the time. It was so hard to believe that he actually brought that gun to school, like he was actually going to carry out that plan. But from what I've seen, he was just so sweet and just does not seem like that type of guy at all. Mind you, his family was a very respected family in our neighborhood. They were super sweet, everybody loved them, they just knew that the son was antisocial. After all this happened, I did not tell anybody about this, like I'm a real bitch. I did not tell my best friends, I didn't tell my parents, I didn't tell nobody. Some time had passed and I hadn't talked to him, he wasn't coming to school, and I was actually blocked on all socials. Even his parents blocked me. Went to his house multiple times, knocked on the door, nobody answered. Eventually someone told me that they moved, but I still had some unfinished business, like for part 6. So this is gonna be me finishing the unfinished business. Like I said, him and his family moved. They didn't tell anybody anything. They just packed their stuff and they left. Everyone in the neighborhood was so confused. But I kept my mouth shut. Like I said, I'm a real bitch. I needed to find the answers as to why. Why did he want to get rid of that tech guy so bad? Well. So I went to tech first period just to see who was all in the classroom. I didn't actually go in the classroom, I was just standing outside the classroom. Based on where my ex was saying that he sat in the room, I figured out who the tech guy was. As soon as the bell rang for first period to be over, I ran to that tech class. I stopped that guy that my boyfriend was talking about. I told him everything. And that is when he admitted to me that one day, they were hanging out, mind you, this boy is a senior, my ex was a sophomore. They hooked up, but my ex was ashamed of what he did, so he threatened to say that he was taken advantage of. That boy said, well, I'm gonna tell people the truth then if you're gonna do that. So basically, my ex was embarrassed of his sexuality. After we started dating, he started to get super ashamed of what he did. And that's why he decided to shoot up the school. This is gonna be a story time of how I almost drowned someone's baby. Y'all, I cannot sleep at night because of this. I cannot believe that I did this to someone's child. But let me go ahead and explain myself. So I was babysitting for this one rich ass family. What's so amazing about it was the fact that the parents were never home. At the same time, I was just a senior in high school. I didn't have much to do after school either. I didn't have hobbies, I didn't play a sport. So I had all the time in the world to babysit for their kid and house sit for them. This baby was only 1 year old. Since the baby was so young, I had to keep eyes on it at all times. They had this big pool area and they said that if I ever wanted to go swimming, I could, and there was a floaty for the baby. One day while I was house sitting and babysitting for them, I went in the pool and I put the baby on the floaty thing. Somehow I forgot that that baby existed. I felt something in the bottom of my feet at the pool. It was like slippery, so I kicked it out the way because I thought it was a toy. And then when I turn around me, I see that the baby is not on the floaty. I look down and I see this tiny human sunk in the water, like for part 2. This is part 2 of how I almost drowned someone's baby. But when this was happening, I was on my phone, so I was distracted. I looked down in the pool and I see that the baby is drowning. I don't really know how to explain the way that my heart skipped a beat at this exact moment. Like my heart was beating regularly and then all of a sudden it skipped 2 beats at a time. My ass was in my forehead. Immediately dived down into the pool, took out the baby, but the baby was suffocating. Now listen, I never did CPR, but God blessed me with those skills in that very moment. I was able to keep myself calm and did CPR on the baby and was able to get it to breathe again. I did not tell nobody shit about this. I didn't tell the parents. The baby is fine. I really should have told the parents because what if it did cause a health issue? But from what I've seen, the baby's fine. Yeah, I didn't tell them what happened, but I quit babysitting because I felt guilty. They haven't said anything about their baby dysfunctioning, so the baby is fine. Just because of this, I pulled myself out of babysitting and I'll never babysit ever again because I'm clearly not responsible enough. It's gonna be a story time while I take my makeup off about how I was the crazy ex. So my boyfriend at the time, we were on and off and he kicked me out and told me to pack my stuff and I had to be out that night. I definitely packed my stuff for sure, packed my stuff and moved it to a different closet in his house that he never opens. So I started sleeping in his car, but he kept finding me there every morning when he had to go to work. So I decided that I was going to continue sleeping in his car and I was going to wake up a little earlier before he had to go to work. And I knocked on his door and I told him that I needed to get some stuff that I forgot. I decided that I was going to take my sweet time up until the time he had to go to work so I could have the house all to myself. I slept in that house for multiple days without this man knowing. Is he ever going to find out? I don't know. Listen, Linda, I honestly did what I had to do and I do it again. Well, one day I remember him coming home and I kept hearing a girl's voice. This time when he came home, it was kind of unexpected, so I had to run under his bed. I kept hearing this girl's voice all the way from downstairs until he came upstairs. And so once he sat down on the bed, I jumped out from out that mother and I jumped on his ass. But I didn't see no girl. Apparently he was just on the phone. He dragged me out the house, told me I was crazy, said he was gonna call the cops if he saw me there again. But all is good. This was like 5 years ago. Me and this man are married now and he is now my baby daddy. And we got 3 kids. This is gonna be a story time about how my whole school went on a manhunt for one student. Why was they looking for his ass? I'm gonna get into it. Let me clarify right now that I am a victim. I do not want nobody in the comments saying, why didn't you do this? Why did you do this? It could have been me. It could have been any of us. That's why I minded my business throughout this whole thing. So I got to school a little late that day, but when I got to my class, I could tell there was a little tension in the air. I didn't know what it was, whether it was a teacher having a problem with a student or a student having a problem with another student. I just knew that the energy was off. So I'm sitting down in class minding my business per usual. The next thing I see is my teacher try to grab this one boy's phone. He immediately snatches it off his desk before she can grab it. That's when they get into this little tug of war type of thing. But the next thing you know, everybody sees this boy mollywop the teacher in the stomach. She falls and he runs out the classroom. Some kids started laughing and thought it was funny until the teacher wasn't waking up. This is when things get bad, like for part 2. This is going to be part 2 of the time my whole school went on a manhunt for one student. So like I said, this kid punched this teacher and ran out the classroom, and the teacher wasn't waking up anymore. So as you can imagine, a room full of drained high school students who just woke up a few hours ago, we were all kind of just like looking around at each other. No one thought to, I don't know, tell somebody that this shit happened. Like, were we silent or were we silent? I blame the school system for making school so early because I feel like once you get to school, your cognitive functions get out the window. So I really try hard not to feel guilty about this, and I try not to blame my other classmates for not doing anything as well. And then eventually, like 5 minutes passed, and then we're like, okay, maybe we should check if she's awake at least. That's when one of the students get up and start to check. Well, they check and they say that she's not breathing. It obviously set something off in our brains, like this is an emergency, something needs to happen now. That's when a bunch of us ran to the office and they called the ambulance. Like for part 3, this is gonna be part 3 of the time my whole school went on a manhunt for one student. We went to the office and told them how the kid punched the teacher and the teacher wasn't waking up. Immediately, a bunch of staff ran to the class to see where the teacher was and what was going on with her. I didn't personally run to the office. When I say we, I mean my classmates. So I was still in the classroom when all the staff ran in. So they told everybody to exit the classroom, and everybody needed to get out of the classroom because they needed to give her some privacy and examine her. So we were all standing outside of my classroom, and it was like 30 kids. The teacher that was next door to us was really close to my teacher. They would always talk in the hallways. They had their lunch periods together, their study periods together, and her door was wide open. Why didn't we go in there and tell her what happened? Honestly, like I said, we were high school students. It was really early. So she came out once she saw all of us standing outside in the hallway, and she was like, what's going on? Once we told her that a kid punched the teacher and that she passed out, her face drops and she announced that the teacher was pregnant. Mind you, nobody knew this because she hadn't announced it herself yet. This is when they called the ambulance, like for part 3. This is going to be part 4 of the time my whole school went on a manhunt for one student. So now everybody knows that this teacher who is passed out on the floor and is not waking up is pregnant. That's when they decided to call the ambulance. I'm guessing they didn't call the ambulance earlier because they were waiting to see if they could try to get her to wake up. They went ahead and put the whole school on lockdown. Nobody was allowed to leave their class, and me and my classmates went into the teacher's classroom next to us. We were sitting in the classroom for like a couple hours, and throughout these couple of hours, what we were hearing outside of the classroom was complete chaos. There was a bunch of cops, a bunch of cop radios, there was dogs. We heard a bunch of yelling and running, and that's when the announcements go off once again. And that's when they announce that they're looking for that kid and they can't find him anywhere in the school, and they're gonna let the day go back to normal, but if anybody sees him, to report it. At this point, everyone at school already knew what happened because of social media, and once they heard on the announcements that they had permission to look for the kid, lots of kids took that as this is a scavenger hunt. When I say lots of kids, I mean the whole school, like for part 5. This is going to be part 5 of the time our whole school went on a manhunt for one student. But once they announced to report the kid who punched the pregnant teacher in the stomach if we see him throughout the school day, lots of kids took that as find him and bring him to me and started hunting him down. I mean, like, as they should. So anyways, yeah, complete chaos broke out. As soon as that bell rang, child, you would be able to leave school and nobody would notice. Everybody was in the hallways. People were looking under the stairwells. They were checking in the janitor's closet, opening up doors that they shouldn't be opening. And with everybody looking for this kid, we found him pretty fast. We did what the police and police dogs couldn't do. This kid was hiding in the band room under the band instructor's desk. They found him and arrested him on school property. We got word that that teacher did in fact lose her baby, but she was okay and she was alive, but she chose not to work at that school again. But she never came back, and I don't know, I think that kid is still in prison. This is the time my mom faked her death so she didn't have to take care of me and my siblings. Yes, this girl really faked her death. So at the time, I was 5 and my little brother was 3. It started off with my mom saying that she didn't feel well and she couldn't pick me up from school, so the bus would have to take me home. Well, a few months after, she started getting picked up from our house by this black car. She said that car was picking her up because of her so-called doctor's appointments. And she wasn't able to drive herself because she was too sick. Well, one day, when this car came to pick her up, she never came home. Me and my little brother was sitting around for a couple days waiting for her to come home, but she never came home, and we were young, so we didn't do anything. Eventually, my aunt came over to our house and told my little brother and I that our mom had passed away and that she was cremated and they kept the ashes. So our aunt started taking care of us. Until one day I saw my aunt getting picked up by that same black car. That's when I started to get suspicious of everything, and I decided to check these ashes. When I checked, It was flour. Like for part 2. This is part 2 of the time my mom faked her death so she didn't have to take care of me and my siblings. Like I said, my aunt told me that my mom had died and they cremated her and they let her keep the ashes and that she was going to start taking care of us. Me not knowing how long the cremating process actually took at the time since I was so young, I believed her. Until one day I saw my aunt getting picked up by the same black car that my mom used to get picked up by before she died. That's when I decided to check these supposed ashes and it was actually flour. So one day when my aunt got picked up by this black car, I decided to follow her. I didn't have a car, I was 5 years old, so I had to follow them by walking and hiding behind bushes. I was able to follow them up the street, and once they turned the corner, and there I saw my mom standing on the side of the street. That's when I see the car stop and I see my aunt get out and approach my mother. She tells my mom to give her money for covering for her and taking care of me and my little brother. Mom says she faked her death because my dad wasn't in our lives and she didn't want to take care of us anymore. I'm older now and I cut her off completely and I have full custody of my little brother. I said I'd be sharing more stories of things that happened to me while I was younger that I've kept secret for my entire life and haven't told anybody, so here's another story. Fair warning, this video might be a little triggering. I was really young at the time. I don't exactly remember what age. I was around 8 or 13 years old. Me and my friends were going to this haunted maze and it was around Halloween time. It was one of my friend's parents that was taking us there and it was a group of 5 or 6 of my friends. While me and my friends were going through this maze, we were standing in a line and I was standing in the very back. So while we were walking, I ended up tripping on my shoelace and I fell to the side where there was curtains. It was the curtains where the workers would pop out and try to scare you. When I fell, I tried to yell for my friends, but because of the sound effects of the maze, they couldn't hear me. And by the time I got up, they were gone. So I started walking and I eventually got to a place where you could only go right or left, and I went left. And once I went left, I ended up in a circular room where there was 5 passageways. But there was also a group of teenage boys and I didn't even see them at first. All I know is I turned around and got grabbed, like for part 2. This is part 2 of the time I got lost in a haunted maze. Like I said, I lost track of my friends and I was looking for my friends and I ended up in a part of the maze where there was all these guys that I didn't even see at first. All I know is I turned around and I got grabbed. So I screamed. I was super young at the time. I was defenseless. I didn't know what to do. Those guys seemed like they were around their teenage years and they were laughing and making a joke out of it. One of them was laughing and they told their friend, grab her legs. And so the friend grabbed my legs and they were tugging me and pulling me. And then they started to pull my pants down. Panic was filling over my body. I couldn't even scream. When you're young, you'd always think you know what to do at these moments, but you really don't. You just freeze up. And that's exactly what I did. I just froze up. But thankfully, as soon as I felt my pants starting to get pulled down, another group of people turned the corner, and that's when the boys dropped me and ran, like for part 3. This is going to be part 3 of the time I got lost in a haunted maze. Like I said, another group of people started to turn the corner. That's when the boys dropped me and they ran. Those group of people didn't really get to see what was going on. So they asked me if I was okay. I told them that I was good. Me being super young and scared, I didn't really want to tell them what happened. My parents were also really iffy about me going out and I didn't want there to be a situation that would make them not trust me anymore. So they started to walk me out of the maze, you guys. And I'm guessing we were nearing towards the exit. But as we were nearing towards the exit, I completely forgot about the boys. I realized that I didn't have a bracelet that I was wearing. Me being young and trying not to annoy the people that found me and were helping me get out of the maze, I wanted to turn around, but I didn't want to tell them that I needed to turn around because I lost something. So I ran back. As I was running back, trying to find this bracelet in this maze, I had ran into the same group of teenage boys who assaulted me, like for part 4. This is going to be part 4 of the time I got lost in a haunted maze. I had lost something in the maze, and once I ran back to find it, I had ran into the same group of teenage boys who assaulted me. Like I said previously, I had completely forgotten about these boys. How did I forget about these boys? I'm not sure. I was very young, very dumb, and I wish I wasn't scared at the time to tell those people who were walking me out of the maze that I had lost something, because I'm sure they would have been nice enough to help me find it. But I was scared. I didn't want to annoy them. So as soon as I saw those boys, I was thinking life or death. Why was I thinking life or death? I'm not sure, but that was my instinct. So I took it upon myself to do the dash, and I ran and ran and ran, and I did not look back. I didn't remember which way to go out of the maze, but I somehow did make it out. Thankfully, the Lord was really watching over me that day. And once I got out, I was screaming for my friends. I was screaming their names. I was looking for them everywhere. Eventually, I found my friends, and I just hugged one of them and started bawling.